All right, next up we have a live artist demo with William Vanaria. So Will, the stage is yours.
I was muted there for a moment, but now I'm not. Yeah. So, hi, I'm William Vanaria. I'm a local artist in Waltham, and yeah, I've technically lived here for a vast majority of my life, except for a brief stint where I moved to Boston and then New Bedford for college. I make art, obviously, and I specialize in the field of jewelry. Today I'm going to be showing off the file carving techniques that I use to create a lot of my work. I have a lot of examples, I have a lot of stuff to cover, and hopefully this should be fun. To start, I'm going to bring you over here so you can actually see my workbench a little bit better. Oh, yes, and also I sell work at Monique Rancourt's Artisan Gallery. This presentation was not sponsored in any way, shape, or form by Monique Rancourt's Artisan Gallery. Oh, there we go. So, let me grab a couple examples of some of the stuff I make. File carving is a knife working technique that I've kind of co-opted and kind of used for jewelry. Before I became a jeweler, I did a lot of 3D sculpture and knife making and stuff like that. So transitioning into it with this technique has been kind of interesting. I'm putting on gloves because technically these items are for sale and I don't want to tarnish them. So yeah, what I'm talking about when I say file carving is things of this kind of nature right here, where, let me zoom in on that and get you in focus. Yeah, so stuff like this, where you have a pattern that's been carved into the side of a ring and kind of imparts a new sort of, kind of like a texture, but not really. It's a pretty deceptively easy process to do, and it's just a little bit monotonous, but I find it kind of fun and therapeutic. But yeah. There is, however, a lot of math involved in it, especially when you get into things like this, where you have to calculate which, what angle to put it in and all that such. But, that's not too big of a deal. So, yeah, let's get right into it. Here are some patterns that I generally use in my work. I made these as blanks, as they're, they kind of serve as a reference point for a lot of my stuff, so I can kind of look at them and get a good idea of what's going to happen. I also have molded these, and they get cast through a caster in Providence, Rhode Island. And yeah, they actually sell them as earrings, hoop earrings on my website. So there's a lot of different patterns to choose from and a lot of different things you can do. But the gist of it is that you're taking the profile and shape of a hand file, or in this case, a needle file, and you're transferring it onto the metal via a specific angling of it and just repetition and filing. When doing this technique, the most important thing to do is to keep everything consistent. The human eye is a miraculous instrument, and it can see things, pretty close up, like up to about, I think, like 2,000ths of an inch. But the human brain is even better at spotting patterns. So if one thing is off, it is incredibly noticeable.
Hmm.
So to that end, whenever I make a pattern like this, the very first thing that I do after I've done all my math, which thankfully I've done all that for you, is I will take my my sheet of metal to be, and I will start marking it with my calipers. Now, this right here is a piece of brass that I'm using for example, and it has a coat of Dichem blue on it, which is this stuff right here. And what that does is it allows me to see a very clear line on the metal. Normally, I don't use this stuff when I do this. I have it here today because I've taught this class at Metalworks via streaming, and overwhelmingly, I have found that the blue shows up way better on camera than the pure metal does. So that's what I'll be doing. It also reduces the glare. So if you're going to be doing this at home, you do not need to go out and get a thing of Dichem, though I would highly recommend it. So for this pattern right here, I am going to make a ring that is a size 8, and I want to have an even number of spaces and I want to have an even number of modules, I guess you could call them. Let me explain. You have to make sure that when you make a ring, it matches up with itself. So, for example, if you do this incorrectly and you don't calculate properly, at the very end, it will just kind of like mishmash. Whereas if you do it correctly, you'll get a nice, even, seamless pattern. So there's a bit of math involved. It involves finding out the circumference of the ring and then dividing it by numbers until you get a number that can be divisible by an even number. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, I've done that already. I know for a fact, using my ring chart, that a size 8 ring is 32.1 millimeters in diameter, in length, if I make it into a band, and divide that by 20 is 3.1 millimeters. So each of these spacings will be 3.1 millimeters. I'm gonna take these off now. They are quite bothersome. So when you do this, and I'm probably gonna, I'm throwing a bit of shade here right now. When you do this, you don't want to use nice calipers. And I will say sterets are no longer nice calipers. Reason being is the calipers are a very precision instrument, and doing that to the jaws can kind of throw them out of whack. But it's immensely useful to be able to just go on here, put the jaws in like this, zoom in for you, and then scratch a line like that. And when I'm doing a pattern like this, generally speaking, the way that I do it is I will scratch a line in like that, then use the caliper's 0 function, and then go back to that number again. In this case, 3.1. And it just has to be kind of in the ballpark of that number. If it's like, I don't know, 0.1 millimeters or 0.05 millimeters off, it's not going to make that big of a difference. Like 3.08, that's close enough to 3.1 for my tastes. Now, this part takes a while, so I'm going to put this aside and pull this one out. I've already started doing it to this guy right here before the stream even began. But it is a bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a Herculean effort, but it is, I don't know, maybe more of a Sisyphean effort. I don't know, depends. But yeah, this is kind of the most boring part of the operation. And these lines are put in place specifically to make sure that everything lines up evenly. Whenever I do this, I always have a set of patterns that I like to do a lot of. And actually, let me grab them for you. I'll usually list out exactly what, there we go. What size, what shape, what files I need to use, and all that stuff, and catalog them, because if I figure out how to do something, I'll want to be able to replicate that pretty easily. Now, in theory, though, this process is incredibly replicatable if you know the correct numbers. Yeah. Grab that there. So just do that right there. Boom. All right, so now that we have, for this example piece, we have a bunch of these lines laid out. We're going to go ahead and select a pattern. For this demonstration, I'm going to do the Thorns pattern, which is a very popular one I found. And that would be this guy right here. You saw it earlier on that ring. And let me focus in on that guy. Come on. Yeah. Oh, well, it's refusing to cooperate with me. Let me pull back a little bit. There we go. So it's this guy right here. You saw it earlier on that ring, this guy right here. So it can be used in varying applications. There it goes. But with this one, it kind of tapers and kind of gets smaller. So that was a bit of a nightmare. But anyway, without further ado. So the first thing to do with this pattern is you want to get a saw frame out and you want to start cutting some notches. And the reason we do that is when we go to file this thing, if we don't have a groove for the file to fit in, it'll want to like deflect and go everywhere. So for your own sanity, it's a lot easier to just get the saw frame out and prepare the metal that way. And with this pattern, what I do is I go alternating, so like every other, sort of like this actually. One moment, let me pull it out for you. I actually have a handout that I make when I teach this class at Metalworks that goes over explicitly which steps to take. So we're going to start by cutting some little notches every other like that. Then we're going to open them up with a round file, Then we're going to open those up with a half round file and then start putting the points in with a triangle and then square file. Which, fun fact, does anyone want to guess what the proper name for a triangular file is? It's very stupid.
A tri file?
Sort of. They're technically supposed to be called 3-square files, which is probably one of the dumbest notations I've ever heard of, if I'm being painfully honest.
How do you think they came up with that?
I don't know. A lot of the names for tools and techniques and processes in this field are very old and very antiquated, and they're still used because they work. Like, the laws of physics have not changed. So with a lot of things, context is very important, and I suspect with this one, we may have lost the specific context to why it was called that in the first place. Usually there's a pretty good reason why we've named things like that, but then again, we're also still using the imperial measuring system, so who knows. Files are also a bit of a weird thing. In the United States, we have a very, very awkward way of denoting the size and cut of a file. Typically speaking, I believe it goes rough, it goes rasp, rough, bastard, mill bastard, first cut, second cut, hand smooth, something like that. I can't even remember. Whereas the rest of the world uses the Swiss patterning system, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is significantly easier. But, that is how we roll here in America. So I'm not going very deep with these cuts. They're just kind of very lightly going in there to give my file a place to go and to lock it in position. And you really don't want to go too deep on these regardless, because at the very end, when you start cleaning everything up, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to go in real deep with the file to get rid of that little line mark. I've done it before. It's not fun, but hey, these are things. Anyway, so, oops, that's a little bit of a problem. Sometimes the saw frame will skip and then cut in another part, but, So now that we have our notches cut, I'm going to go ahead and move you up a little bit so you can see better when I do this next operation. Those of you who are motion sick in the audience may want to look away for a hot second, because we're going to be entering Barfo vision. A very good friend of mine that I sometimes, he sometimes shows up to my streams. He's been my friend since I've been like 11, but he has the world's worst motion sickness, so I have to always warn him about stuff like that. Yeah. Anywho. Cool. So we're going to start with a triangular file, or a 3-square file would be the proper name for it. And we use what are called needle files, which are like normal files, except they are significantly smaller and have a tang that's built into it, as opposed to a tiny tang for the handle to go into. And they come pretty small in this 4 to 6 inch variant, but they also come even smaller. So I'll be using a mix of normal sized and mini. So this part, you want to make sure that your 3-square file is incredibly sharp, as you will need to wedge that little knife edge in there into that notch you cut. And I know for a fact that the combination of saw blade and file that I use will work, so I should be fine. So I can feel it. If I move it back and forth, it'll want to click in place, and it doesn't want to go anywhere. So as I take my file stroke, it goes exactly on that line. So now it's just a matter of following these marks as I make this ring to be. So I'll be doing 2 patterns on this. You may have noticed that I cut one of them in the same side twice. I'll be dividing this up into 2 patterns and kind of showing you how you can greatly vary these patterns just by very simple steps. I'll be doing the Thorn pattern, and then the, I don't know if it has an official name. I sometimes just call it the wave. You'll see why. But there's a lot of things you can do to kind of change how these look and feel and their final end product. So that's all I needed to do. They're now notched out, and I now have a very easy place for my file to go. Now, for the same exact reason as before, let me turn the light down a little bit. I think that we're having a bit of an issue with that. Is it too bright on your screen? Anybody who can talk?
That helps. I think that helps a little. Yeah.
There we go. I just adjusted the ISO to around 800. That should work just fine. I must say the Canon mirrorless cameras are pretty fantastic. Anyway, so I'm using a round file now, and I'm doing this before I move over to the half round, because the half round is not going to want to go into that tiny notch and not move around because of the huge surface area we have here. So we got to make something a little bit deeper for it to fit into first. Like that. And we don't want to go too deep, as that could cause a little bit of problems a little bit down the line. So there's that. But yeah, this is kind of what I do in my studio space.
So it's kind of like pre-drilling holes. You have to make space.
Precisely. Precisely. This kind of work I don't mind, though. It's kind of fun, I think. Try and like problem solve it out and figure out where everything's going to go. Which is funny because the one jewelry technique that makes my teeth itch is similar in the fact that you have to do a lot of math to figure out where things go, called pave setting. You may have seen it. It's when they take a bunch of gems and then sprinkle it all over a piece like it's some kind of glitter. I'm not doing a very good job of describing it, but I can guarantee that you've all seen it. Okay, so there's that. We're going to create the other pattern on this side. So now that we have those lines put in place, we're going to go ahead and take our half round file and open them up a bit. Now with this part, you want to be careful. To make a really good pattern, for this one at least, I don't like to go beyond halfway past the width of this thing. So sometimes what I'll do to give myself a bit of a, guide is I'll take my calipers and then do that exact same method where I scribe in to make some guidelines. So this guy's 2.85. Now someone in the chat who is better at math than I, what is that divided by 2?
1.42.
1.42, very good. This will be on the test later. So be sure to write that down in your copybook.
Got it.
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and take these calipers and just going to scribe a line down them. And there we go. There we go. This is more important for some patterns than others. With this one right here, it doesn't matter too much if it goes over, but I think it looks more consistent if it doesn't. So with that in mind, I'm going to take this guy right here, and we're going to start opening them up. And you can see very quickly how the file will change the top surface of this pattern. And the angle that I hold the file is also very important. If I do it at like a 45 like this, oops, let me pull this back, there we go. Like that, it'll be a normal depth, but if I go more shallow like this, it'll be even deeper, and it will actually stretch a little bit in this direction. And obviously if you go shallower, it makes it smaller. So there's a lot of things that go into this when you consider making these patterns. But what I will say is, and this is kind of like general advice that I would give to any metalsmith regardless of what they're doing, you want to get good files. As bad files, well, cheaper files, they will make your life a bit miserable if you do certain things like this. Specifically because the cheaper files don't generally have amazingly cut teeth, and they're not as sharp. So you'll be doing this a lot longer, and it will be kind of maddening. The second reason is a lot of files that are on the cheaper end do not have a proper shape to them. So the file may look like a square, but it's actually more of a rhombus. And for something like this, that matters a lot. I would say for most applications, it might not be a huge deal, but for this, it's pretty critical.
This might be a dumb question.
Yeah.
Do files, can you sharpen them, or do they just get run down and you have to just buy new ones?
Yes and no. There are tricks to kind of making those teeth sharp again-ish. Specifically, there is a cocktail that you can mix up of specific acids that a lot of jewelers will use, and they'll actually etch into the files a bit and kind of reveal more of the teeth. I personally have never had a lot of luck with that stuff, but I've heard it from a bunch of other jewelers that they have, so I'm willing to trust them on that. But it's all the more reason why the quality of your file makes such a big difference. These ones that I have here are kind of a mid-range quality. They are made in Italy, and they are by a company called Grobet. And a set of 6 of these guys costs $32. Conversely, a set that was made in Switzerland that I have right here, this one cost about $172. So they go up in price pretty quickly. But then again, there's also 12 in here. Point is, files are expensive. You want to take care of them, and you want to make sure you use them correctly. But overall, they are definitely worth investing money in. I've had the same set of files for like almost 5 years, and they're still just as sharp as they were when I bought them. Well, not just as, they're still pretty darn sharp. Good files last a very long time. Interestingly enough, my grandfather was a machinist who worked for Raytheon when it was here in Waltham, in I think it's where the BJ's is now. I don't know. If you walk around that area, you might not want to bring a Geiger counter with you. But a lot of his tools have been used in steel applications and machining applications. And when I inherited them, his files, which were made in the U.S. back in like the 1950s, are amazing. So we have the technology to make sharp files that stay sharp. It's just, it may not be as profitable.
Or the market is smaller.
It is quite smaller, yes. And also, hand files have become somewhat antiquated in how people approach manufacturing things, specifically thanks to stuff like this right here, which is a flex shaft. Rotary tools have kind of superseded files in a lot of ways. They can grind off material really, really fast, but I don't find that to be quite as accurate.
Now,
Yeah.
are you counting every single time you go in there so that each one of them is the same?
No, I'm actually just like observing that line there and making sure I'm like around it. I'm kind of going fast and loose for this demo. Normally I would be a lot more particular and just like zone in on it for a bit longer. But
this is a really good way of getting an idea of how you do that.
Absolutely. And given the time constraints, I'm just going to go ahead and go full bore on this pattern rather than starting this one. So next, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting the notches in between the line, or in between those little half circles. And there will be some adjustments needed later on. I'll have to move the file to like make these guys more centered, but that can happen later. I generally don't want to compensate for it right now because that'll kind of throw everything else out of whack if I try and fix them. Yeah. So now those are cut in. We're going to go in with a 3-square file again, but we're going to use a small one. This part, you want to make sure you don't go too deep because you really want to have a space between this little thorn that I'm going to put in there and like the 2 sides here and here. Otherwise, it looks kind of weird. So a couple strokes like that to get the file started. All right, turn that sucker around. All right, now that it's started like that, we can start seeing it take shape. And the next thing I'm going to do is get a square file, a proper square file. And I use this as opposed to a triangular file for this, as I have found that the square produces a more sharp result due to how the geometry is cut into it. And I'm going to be attacking it at a very, very steep angle like that to try and make that pattern kind of like go in a bit more. And you can see just by doing that, it's cutting in a very nice shape there.
It makes perfect sense as you describe it, but when you first said it, I thought, how can that be the case?
Yeah, it's a mystery, but it's one that I've hopefully solved. And just like that, there we go. Over there.
Oh, interesting.
You can now see it has that same pattern that I put on the ring over there. And you can kind of mess with these and kind of play with their spacing. Maybe you make it inconsistent and make it so it's like, you know, wider here, but then lower or shorter towards the end, like I did with that ring. And there's a whole lot of other things you can experiment with doing. A lot of these patterns have been kind of stolen from, you know, knife maker patterns, but I do have a couple that I've come up with on my own. And yeah, like there's just a whole bunch of things you can do with this. You can also take your handsaw and use that to cut lines in specific ways. And that's how you get other patterns, such as, where are you? Where are you? I'm holding out, here you are. You can see with this pattern here, there's a whole mess of lines that are cut in that are part of the pattern.
Mm.
And now that I've described this process, you can kind of like mentally break down how this will be done. You know, half round files and then like cutting notches in.
Right, right.
Or this guy right here, which is probably one of my favorites, where it's very simple. You just take a saw frame and cut in zigzags and then put the rounds in between them.
Oh, that's cool too.
Yeah. Let's see, what else we got in here? Oh yeah, this is that same one I just did in the on camera a few moments ago. Put that guy over there. You can get really complex with this though, and some patterns, like the patterns I found to be the hardest, are the ones where you have to match up two triangles like on the edges here, as it's pretty maddening to try and keep chasing your tail and going back and forth on either side to make those match up.
Oh, I bet. Wow, that's so detailed.
Yeah, that one's fun. I don't like doing that one a lot. It takes a very long time because in addition to all the other stuff, I have to like plan it out and drill it.
Right.
And then this guy's a very popular one that's probably the most in-depth and has the most steps. Yeah, that one's fun. But I find that it has a very good look to it when you make it into a ring.
Well, you say it's the most it looks the most organic.
Yeah.
In the way that it comes out, and yet it's the one that requires the most precision.
Yeah, there's just a lot of steps in that one as well. And it's very easy to screw it up if you don't do them all correctly. But yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I believe we were at time then.
We are. Will, thank you so much for sharing this. It really gives me I'm never going to look at a ring in the same way again. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, so.
And we'll be seeing the inside of your studio, or you're on an artist panel tomorrow too, aren't you?
I am, yes. You'll be seeing the inside of my studio there, and you'll be seeing a glimpse into the strange mind of my own. Yeah.
Super.
As always, my website is wmvmetalsmithing.com, where you can find this and a whole slew of other strange things. Yeah.
I'm running over there now. Thanks a lot, Will.